we have Dan Gross from Channel 8 coming in, and met Dan a couple years ago now, or Mr. Gross. A couple years ago now, I made a film on Shakespeare and Macbeth, and I called him up at Channel 8 and I said, would you be willing to do a news interview for me? And he heard what we were doing, he's like, oh my God, please. And he came down, and the day of the interview, we did it at Sunken Garden, Rochester. I asked him, are you gonna come and do our opening at Regal Henrietta? And he said, yeah, sure, I could do that. So a couple weeks before, he shot me an email and I said, hey, so are you gonna cover us for Regal Henrietta? He goes, no, I'm not gonna do it, because I wanna come see you. But I gotta get somebody to do it. He showed up, and it just shows somebody that not only loves what they're doing, but also loves the community and is really involved and in tune with the community. But on top of that, he has a Bachelor's of Fine Arts from SUNY Oswego in Broadcasting Music. Reporter and what News 8 calls a jack of all trades. He was doing the community beat, I believe. He also does the music scene. And just over Thanksgiving, I saw him actually anchoring. I don't know if that's a step up or a step down because you're anchored to a desk. But I'll let him talk about that.
I'll tell you when the paycheck comes.
But he hosts, produces, directs, edits, records Rochester Indie Musician Spotlight, as well as DJs on Jazz 90.1. And he can be found recording shows at the Bop Shop Records. And he also produces songs from Studio B, I believe that's through WROC. But without further ado, Dan Gross.
Hey guys, good to see you. This is really exciting for me to be here. This is true. This is not just a line. Some of my favorite people, favorite teachers have been English teachers. I'm still in touch with a lot of them. Had a couple cool full circle moments when one was opening up a bar and I got to talk to her, and others in a band that I got to record. So the moral of the story here, besides everything else we're going to talk about today, is keep in touch with your English teachers, because I found that really helpful. Today what I want to talk about is a lot of what I do is not just writing, but also writing to video. So that basically means both coming up with a script that makes sense, that when people read it or listen to it, it makes sense, and then when they watch it, what people are seeing from what I wrote or what I'm saying match. So we're going to be talking today about some video basics. So when you watch video, what generally you can use. Writing to video. And the other thing Mr. Burns wanted me to touch on, and this was after my previous lesson here, is how to use what we would call in the news business nat sound, which is natural sound. But then how to use that in your storytelling as well. So we're going to go through some of those basics. We're going to play some video. These are all stories that I've done that I think illustrate these things really well. And we'll break those down. So this is going to be interactive. It's going to be fun. I know that this is early. I'm struggling with you guys. Trust me, I'm still waking up too. But yeah, this will be fun. If you guys have any questions about anything, whether it's working in news, working in media, just feel free to ask. As you're leaving, that's my name and email address. Write it down, take a photo of it on your way out, and keep in touch. I'd love to hear from you guys. So the first thing, Mr. Burns was talking about my work on the business side of things. Just wanted to give a quick overview. So typically that means I will cover a new business opening in our community. Maybe one is closing. And a project that I've been working on a lot, or covering a lot, is the Bull's Head redevelopment. So if you guys go on, so if you go down Genesee Street, basically, before it turns on to Main, there's just this huge section here that needs redevelopment. So that'll be one of those projects that I'm working on. That's kind of right in these neck of the woods. But a lot of the videos we're going to do today are from some earlier stories of mine in News 8. I just thought that they better illustrate it. So when we're talking about video, at least in terms of news and kind of what I'm doing, which is the documentary style, but you can take these anywhere, we're generally talking about wide, medium, and tight shots. So wide has, if you're sort of looking from my perspective, a wide shot here would be I could see the whole classroom essentially, right? And there's a lot of negative space, what we would call it. There's a lot up top, there's a lot up bottom. A medium shot would be maybe I'm focusing on this half of the classroom, and then a close-up shot would be something really tight on Mr. Burns here, where part of his face is cropped off. And you can use these to really cool emotional and storytelling effects. So with a wide shot, you get a lot of information, and it can help create a sense of place. So you look at a wide shot, and if I were to see this, I could tell everything about this classroom, right? How old the kids are that are in it, who they are, computers in here, you can see teachers too. But if I were to focus on this part of the classroom, I don't have as much information, but that can also present a lot of intimacy. And then if it's a really close shot, all I'm getting is this. So that can add a lot of mystery to what you're doing, and that can convey a lot of emotional strength, right? So that's one thing where so often movies, when someone is crying or someone is really emotional, you want that really close shot, right? Because that conveys a lot of intense emotion. So what I'm going to do is we're going to watch one of these. And the first one we're going to watch is a story that I did on a local business. And I thought it would work pretty well because it is a poem after all. That's how I wrote it, which I thought was pretty fun. And then just look for use of wide, medium, and tight shots. And then we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards. And then we have a couple more examples. Cool? Let's do it.
On a street in Rochester is a building with a funny sign. It's a business that kind of looks out of time. But for more than 150 years, the Fee brothers have helped you say cheers.
On to their fifth generation, they're crafting many a new creation. Dan Gross caught up with John and Ben to learn about the Fee brothers now and then.
Taking over this business from their aunt and uncle Spaker, John and Ben are Rochester's newest bitter makers. A bitter is an acrid addition to your drink, but the Fee brothers have two mixers that make you think. But besides making accessories for a libation, the heart of the business, they say, is reinvention.
Have reinvented ourselves a number of times. Started out as wine and whiskey, and then moved through Prohibition, getting into the cocktail mixes to help bootleg liquor taste better.
Now, with soaring sales from the pandemic, it seems, they're taking the business to the extremes, taking the craft-made goodies in a small bottle and making thousands now at full throttle.
Sure. So we have tanks in the back in our operations that range from 50 gallons all the way up to 1,500 gallons. In some cases, we're making double batches of 3,000 gallons at a time of product. And we have really tight standards that we always follow to make sure that we're hitting it every single time.
Now, one of the world's biggest and best at what they do, John and Ben are still trying to take the long view. And once their new jobs have settled into place, they can keep up their pace with grace. So the brothers Spaker can become the brothers Fee to keep their rightful place in the family tree.
As Ben said, it's very humbling. And as our aunt says, if we mess up, we'll be the one who will be disappointing our ancestors, not her.
So what do we see in terms of shot selection? Can anyone point out a couple of wide shots that you might have seen in that? So they convey a lot of information. So I'll point out a couple to get us started here.
On a street.
So here, this one's a bit unusual in that I didn't start with a wide shot for a news story. But we would call this a wide shot, right? So you can see pretty much, you can look at that and know exactly what that is. That looks like a warehouse, that looks like a place where they make stuff. And then, that would be a medium shot. So check that out, right? We're going from, you can see everything here, to we can see part of what's going on. You can still look at this right here and see, okay, this guy's packing up bottles. To a really tight shot, where that shows that that guy is really, he's using his hands. So you can see how this works in terms of this kind of storytelling, right? You can go from really general to really specific here in just a couple shots. And when you put them all together, you can get a nice, what we would call a sequence in a news video editing.
Bootleg liquor tastes better.
Now, with soaring sales from the pandemic, it seems, they're taking the business to the extremes. Taking the craft-made goodies in a small bottle and making thousands now at full throttle.
So in just a few shots, we get a really good sense of how this works, right? We get the wide shot, we see what's in there, and then as that story progresses, we can get a closer look at how that happened. So now that we've got a couple examples, any further wide shots or medium shots or tight shots that you guys saw throughout that thing?
When they're putting the labels on, I saw the tight shot.
Yep, that'd be one, right? So you get a close-up and you can see what their product is. We got a couple of those. So another good example of a medium shot here, or the difference of how a medium versus tight shot would work. Here, where we see both of them at the end, we would call that a medium shot, where you see both of them. So you can't see everything, you don't exactly know where they are, other than they're in front of some cocktail mixer bottles. But then here would be a tight shot, because we're just focused on him. So the reason you'd want to use these different kinds of shots is because they're conveying different levels of information, or you're conveying different information. And as you guys are working on your poetry video project, this is something, some of you are working on this, but in any kind of visual storytelling, this is how you can take what you wrote, or what the script was, or what someone is saying, or your voiceover, and help convey that in terms of a video format. So we're going to watch part of this. We're not going to watch the whole thing through one more time. But now, instead of watching, I want us to listen instead. Because the other reason why I think this story works really well, besides the lame poetry, is that in addition to being very visual, you can hear a lot of what is going on. And so often when we watch video, what really takes us into that moment is because we don't have smell, for example, is hearing what's going on. So before we watch this, just to get ourselves in the right mindset, just sort of imagine for a second that you're seeing a waterfall. Well, what's the next thing that happens after you see a waterfall? You hear it immediately. I didn't even have to ask you to listen to what a waterfall sounds like. You associate that sound, or you can hear it, and you know what that would sound like. The same thing when you see a stream, right? We kind of know what the sound of running water is. So when those elements are absent, it can feel very jarring. So audio is a great way to get your audience into that space. So we're going to watch probably the first third of this, and we're going to think about some examples of how that audio is used.
Taking over this business from their aunt and Uncle Spaker, John and Ben are Rochester's newest bitter makers. A bitter is an acrid addition to your drink, but the Fee brothers have two mixers that make you think. But besides making accessories for a libation, the heart of the business, they say, is reinvention.
Have reinvented ourselves a number of times. Started out as wine and whiskey, and then moved through Prohibition, getting into the cocktail mixes to help bootleg liquor taste better.
Now, with soaring sales from the pandemic, it seems, they're taking the business to the extremes. Taking the craft-made goodies in a small bottle and making thousands now at full throttle.
Sure. So we have tanks in the back in our operations that range from 50 gallons all the way up to 1,500 gallons. In some cases, we're making double batches of 3,000 gallons at a time of product. And we have...
So what was some use of sort of that natural sound? Or how did the sound match what you were seeing in some of those sections?
I saw them putting the bottles on like the conveyor belt thing.
Yeah.
I heard like clinking.
Right. So when you watch that, you have a sense that that's really loud. And your brain can kind of fill in those gaps sometimes. But we could play that section again. But if your eyes were closed...
The extremes. Taking the craft-made goodies in a small bottle and making thousands now at full throttle.
You still sort of know what's going on. Because you can hear the bottles clinking, you can hear that it's a loud factory. And that puts you in that situation so much more than if that video didn't have any sound. So if you guys are working on your projects or you're doing any kind of video, that can be a really helpful tool when you're putting anything together, because that is going to give your audience so much of a sense of place. And you can even be more creative with it if you think about ideas of recording one piece of sound to use with a different video, and you can juxtapose it or use the tool to convey the opposite meaning. So I'm going to play you another example, and I think this one really works because I am writing to video and to sound in that way, where we juxtapose it. So you're going to, in this story, you will hear things, but you won't see things. That makes it sound like you're going to hallucinate. You're not. But there's this disconnect between what you're seeing and what you're hearing in a way that tells the story. So this was in 2021. So some of you might not have even been in high school yet. So that was a weird time to be working in my business, I'll say. So this was, I'll skip our anchors for this one. But this was essentially about, as some COVID guidelines were being relaxed for local businesses and different sporting events, I spoke with the general manager of the Rochester Red Wings to talk about how they were preparing. So at this point, they hadn't had a game in over a year or something, or they were coming up on a big milestone where they hadn't had a game. So I was checking in with him to see how...
The crack of the bat, a fastball to the catcher, and a runner stealing second. All iconic sounds of baseball. But none of those are the favorite sounds of GM of the Rochester Red Wings, Dan Mason.
The roar of the crowd, honestly, the sounds of a game, the people.
Watching a baseball game at this now eerily empty Frontier Field is high on the post-pandemic list for many Rochesterians. But the Wings have been wrapped up for well over a year now.
You know, it's going to be over 600 days between Red Wings games.
But with the pandemic checking our swing at every bat, the Red Wings find themselves at the plate with an 0-2 count, facing the reshuffling of the minor leagues and a possibly crippling capacity restriction, not to mention a required negative test before a game.
Right now, our capacity is 10%, which is challenging, you know, but it's better than zero. But at the time, that I think, you know, that went for indoor venues as well as outdoor venues. You know, so right now we're the same as an indoor venue, which I think it's, you know, outdoors is, you know, the hope is that we would have a little bump in that by the time we open that.
But Mason is a patient and optimistic hitter, waiting for the perfect moment to hit a home run. He's hopeful that once players and more Monroe County denizens get their vaccination, they can get a ticket to the big show.
We're getting closer. That's all I can say is we're really getting closer, and it's going to be great.
So although the crowd noise might not be the same with 10% restriction, a slow trot to home might be the perfect way for us to celebrate a COVID strikeout. Dan Gross, News 8.
All right.
So yeah, what were some examples of using audio to help tell that story? So we had crowd noise, right, that I added in afterwards. So that was obviously not something I recorded at the time because there were no people in there. So I took crowd noise from a previous Red Wings game and I overlaid it there. And when you hear something but don't see it, it can create an emotional effect. And you can use that in a bunch of different ways.
So how did you create the slide sound? Did you have to slide?
No, there was I actually found a website that had royalty-free baseball sounds, which can be a really great tool. There are a bunch of good royalty-free sites out there that you can use for photos, video, and audio too. So the bat sound, the pitch, and the catch in the slide were all from that website, but then the crowd noise was from an actual Red Wings game, which I thought was a good touch. So that's a good example of how you can use audio that is not inherently in the video to help tell that story. Another good example of this, and this is one we all know, which is a soundtrack, right? So if anyone has seen Psycho, for example, the classic Hitchcock film, the shower scene would hit much differently if it didn't have that classic violin theme, right? It would be weird if it was the SpongeBob theme playing, right? And that actually be some good homework for you guys. There are a bunch of these compilations on YouTube of stuff with the wrong soundtrack, and you can kind of see how this stuff works. We're going to watch one more, and we're going to do the same thing. We'll watch it through, and I think this one is a really good example of how to both write to the video, shoot to the video, and use of natural sound. And what I like a lot about this is it doesn't have any of my own voiceover other than the beginning. So I interviewed this guy, his name is Ned. He runs Powers Farm in Pittsburgh, about how he carves thousands of pumpkins to go in their iconic teepee. And so I talked with him about that. And so the entire story is just his track, what I overlaid, shot over it, and sound from the video. So we're going to watch that. We'll ask for specific questions at the end.
The teepees at Powers Farm Market are a Rochester area institution, and today we're going behind the scenes with Ned Powers to see how he picks out the perfect pumpkin and gets it into the teepee.
Obviously all the pumpkins come from our farm. We grow between 35 and 40 acres of pumpkins every year.
I am just astounded this year how these pumpkins turn out. We've never had a crop like this. And it was actually quite a struggle this spring. It was very wet and cold.
Obviously it's got to look good, and what looks good to everybody is a little different, but I would pick one with a nice sturdy stem on it, dark orange skin. You should be good from there. Have fun carving. This year the pumpkins are weighing up quite a bit heavier than they typically would. We're fortunate in a way that we've got sandy soil, so we can get on it. I think my dad saw a corn shock teepee somewhere, and they were probably about 10 or 12 feet tall. And he and my mom were driving back, and my mom turned to him and said, "Let me guess, yours are going to be 3 times as big." And he goes, "Yep," and they were. My grandfather owned the farm, so I'm 3rd generation. I'm 2nd generation here at the market. I would say my wife does the lion's share of the carving. Okay, I'll accept master pumpkin carver, I guess. We take the bottom off. Just enough, obviously, so you can get your hand in there and clean it out. So that way the pumpkin stands up on its own.
Years of experience.
Since I was about 5.
Pull it up. So we just use a scoop. Again, it's not sharp, but it does have little serrated edges. We have these at the market. Nice thick skin, nice dark orange. Obviously that makes it more attractive. So another weird thing, I gut with my left, but I carve with my right. Because I like to have leave room for a big mouth, so I usually just do 2 little holes, at least for me anyway. Generally they'll last 3 to 5 days. On this side, I've connected the teeth here. So that way, if you don't connect it, the pumpkin's pretty heavy and it'll kind of squish. That's the general idea. Since 1976, that's what's so fun about this time of year is I grew up doing it, and it's fun to see generations of families now coming back and enjoying it as well, and that's really a lot of the enjoyment for us. It shows up pretty well.
So what examples did we see of any of the stuff we talked about, whether it was shot selection, whether it was use of audio? What did we see in there that kind of popped out to everybody?
It was like a tight shot when he was like peeling pumpkins.
Yeah, right, so that we all have that great memory of carving pumpkins out, so when you get a nice close shot of it, you can really feel that, you know what that's like. Any examples, other examples of shot selection or use of audio? Yeah.
Carving the pumpkin.
That's a good one. I really love, one of my favorite parts of the story was hearing that crunch when he was yanking off the pumpkin. That's still one of my favorite little moments from all my time at Channel 8. What are some other ones? We'll do a couple more and then we'll have a general Q&A in a few minutes. But what else did we kind of point out from that video that really took you into that moment?
The audio.
Yeah?
Like with the wind and like the water. Could hear my feet.
Right, so you could tell it was a windy day just from watching that, right? You kind of got the sense that this is a cold, wet, windy fall day as you were watching that.
I don't think there was a witch there.
So what was funny about that is I come in with the camera, and then Ned says to a bunch of the gals who were working there, it's like, "Oh, I'm on TV today," and they all did that witch cackle. So that was something that was actually captured at the time. That wasn't something that was added in. And I just, I wanted to keep it because it was a funny moment, even if it was a little jarring in there. One of the wine shot examples that I thought worked really well in this one I love this wide shot. This is a really good example, in my mind, of a really good wide shot, right? So we know we're on a pumpkin farm because we see the pumpkins there. The story is about the guy bringing the pumpkins to the teepee. So we see the teepee there. Our subject is still in the shot. So you'll see a lot of these in Spielberg films. Are really good example of this kind of wide shot is in Lawrence of Arabia. That's a movie that was really known for portraying vastness across the desert. So they used a lot of wide shots like this in sort of this lateral sense. So that was basically what I had prepared today for you guys. I wanted to make sure that you guys had the basics of using wide, medium, and tight shots in any video project that you do. Wanted to give you guys 3 good examples of what it looks like when you write to the video, and how to use natural sound in your projects as well, and some different ideas for that. We have a couple more minutes, I think, before you guys are off to your next class, but feel free to ask me anything about working in Channel 8, working in video, working in audio. I'm here to answer those questions.
What was your favorite story you covered in Rochester?
These are, I would say 2 out of the 3 of these are 2 of my favorites. The Fee Brothers, because I came up with the idea to write it in sort of that Dr. Seuss rhyme I was really proud of. Yes, even though it's lame. I also really like that pumpkin carving. That's one that I go back to a lot. And then some other stories that I'm proud of, that development at Bull's Head just down the road here. I've done a lot of stories on those, and I'm really proud of that continuing coverage. Li-Cycle, which is a big development for a battery recycler that's run into a lot of financial difficulties. I've been really happy how I've been able to keep up on that story as well. And there was another cool one. There's a newish business that opened up in the South Wedge called Marilla's Mindful Supplies, and she sells a lot of sustainable home goods. So I first covered her store when she opened in Geneva 4.5-5 years ago. And then I was there the day she opened in Rochester. So that's kind of the cool part when you get to do something for a long time, you have that kind of continuing coverage. So those would be some good examples of continuing coverage, but if I had to pick sort of, even if I watch those now and say, with someone with more experience, how I do a couple things differently, I'd say the pumpkin carving one and the Fee Brothers ones are still 2 of my kind of favorite self-contained stories. And it also worked really well for the purposes of this lesson, so that worked out. Yeah?
I have a comment and question. My favorite one is one you did about a movie over at Sunken Garden.
You know what? and here's another good example. So maybe Mr. Burns can leave you guys with this homework too. But if you watch that story I did with him and his team, there's a really good example of some natural sound at the end that it really puts you in that universe. So he knows what that is. I don't have that queued up at the moment. But that'd be a good example. So if you search News 8 tomorrow and tomorrow, it'll come up.
But my question was, when you're choosing shots for a story map, like exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, are there certain shots that you generally use for different parts of the story?
So that kind of, I got a chalk here someplace. So what I tend to think about, news writing is a little bit different than creative writing because it's so much more fact-based, but have you guys talked about kind of the story pyramids at all? Is this a thing? So one thing I learned, hopefully you guys can see this okay, when I was in high school, were sort of story pyramids like this, you know, where the wider sections are the more general stuff, and then the point is a very specific thing. So this is weirdly because this works out really well for wide, medium, and tight shooting. So when I'm thinking about those type of things, when you're exposition, it's a wide shot. And then the climax is usually a tight shot. So there's a great line, I think it's from Charlie Chaplin too, which is kind of related to this. I think he said, comedy is a wide shot and tragedy is a close-up. And what I like about that too is it shows how these different shots can convey different meanings. So I said earlier, I don't remember which story it was, that it was unusual that I didn't start with a wide shot. It's very common practice and use to start with a wide shot because that's where you have the most information. It's the most general. And then when you really want to narrow in on a specific point, it's a tight shot. But you can also use this in opposite effect. A movie that did this really well was The King's Speech. So if you watch this movie, for most of the movie, anytime you saw the main character, he was in a wide shot. And not only was he in wide shot, it was framed in a way where he looked very small. So if you go back and watch this movie, and I would recommend it, in almost every scene up until, well, it's not a, yeah, up until the speech, he is framed very wide and there's a lot of room above his head, so it makes him look very small. But then towards the end, as he regains his power, it comes up in a tight shot. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about it. The exposition is definitely a wide shot, and anything climax or that has a bigger emotional impact would definitely be a close-up. But you can use that, as I said too, to opposite effect. Right? If you were to see a comedy scene, and it was, like, I'm going to get close here. If you were to watch a comedy scene, and it would be this close in her face, it would feel weird. You're like, why is this person laughing? Why can't I not see what's going on? Because comedy is about context. So you can use these two things in opposite ways too, which is a really fun trick when you get to do it.
What's your favorite movie for the cinematography?
Oh. Yeah, tomorrow's a good one. I would say Lord of the Rings for the wide shots is just a good example, and then I think another one, the cinematography, I still think about it a lot, is Birdman. So that's a really interesting movie. For those who haven't seen it, the very short version is that the main character used to play Birdman on TV, which is an analogy for Batman, and then he's trying to find himself with his daughter at a local theater company. What's really cool about it is the entire soundtrack is almost just one drummer, great jazz drummer, Antonio Sanchez, who provides that kind of drum beat for the whole thing. And that's sort of the underlay, right? So you always get this kind of movement. So that's another good example of using a soundtrack. But so much of that cinematography is on a one shot, and it moves and pans with the characters. So that whole movie, you get a really interesting sense of movement between both the drum soundtrack and the moving camera, as opposed to more of what I'm doing, which are a bunch of static shots in a row, edited in a way to give it motion, where that relies a lot on motion in the camera. And I mentioned Lawrence of Arabia. It's too classic to necessarily call it a personal favorite, but it's really informative. Guys, thanks so much for having me in your classroom. I really appreciate it. I am serious. If you guys want to stay in touch, that's my email address. I am very good on email, and I'd love to stay in touch with everybody. Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.